Okay, so let's talk about Charles Dickens's Great Expectations. Even if you've never actually read it, you probably know the gist, right? The orphan Pip, the spooky Miss Havisham in that decaying wedding dress. It's a total classic. But here's the thing. For over 150 years, people have been arguing about what this book is even about. So let's try and unravel the mystery of this novel's strange double life.
So, what is it? Is it a feel-good story, full of charming characters and that classic Dickensian humor? Or is it actually a dark psychological critique of a pretty corrupt society? Well, the wild thing is, depending on when you ask that question, you'd get a completely different answer. How on earth did one of the most famous novels ever written end up with two totally opposite identities?
All right, to get the first reputation, we've got to go all the way back to the 1860s. Now, Charles Dickens was basically a literary rock star by this point, but his star had kind of dimmed a little. His recent books like Bleak House and Little Dorrit were seen as, well, pretty somber, and his audience was really hungry for that cheerful, funny author they'd first fallen in love with.
And with Great Expectations, it looked like they got exactly what they wanted. The first reviews were just thrilled. The Times celebrated it as a huge return to form, calling it one of his happiest books. They loved its flowing humor, which they said disarms criticism. It was a massive hit for one simple reason. It felt like the good old Dickens was back. You see this in other reviews, too. The Athenaeum basically called it a greatest hits album. They said it had the punch of Oliver Twist, the heart of David Copperfield, and the pure fun of the Pickwick Papers. So to its first readers, this was no dark fable. This was Dickens in his prime, just doing what he did best.
But not everyone was totally sold. Even with all that praise, a few critics started to poke some holes in the story, and they were planting these little seeds of a debate that would completely change the novel's legacy down the road. The main problem they had? The characters.
The Saturday Review, for instance, pointed right at characters like Miss Havisham, calling her a melodramatic exaggeration. So while some readers saw this deeply truthful portrait of a broken heart, others were like, come on, this is just way over the top. A classic example of Dickens exaggerating things until all reality fades away. And this whole question of realism, it would become absolutely central to the novel's future.
But the biggest twist in the story of Great Expectations isn't even in the book. It happens behind the scenes, with the ending. This one single decision has fueled arguments for more than a century, and it's absolutely key to understanding the book's split personality.
So get this. Dickens wrote one ending and then published a completely different one. His friend, another novelist named Bulwer Lytton, read the original, much more downbeat version and told Dickens, hey, this is way too sad for the public. So, under pressure, Dickens rewrote it to be a bit more commercially friendly.
And the difference between the two is just wow. It's night and day. The original is bleak, kind of melancholy. Pip and Estella meet by chance, she's remarried, and they say goodbye forever. But in the version that got published, they meet again. They're both single, and the story ends with that famous hopeful line where Pip says he saw no shadow of parting from her. A total downer becomes a potential romance, all because of a friend's note.
Now, after Dickens died, something really fascinating started to happen. The way people saw Great Expectations began to shift, and I mean radically. The funny, happy novel that his contemporaries loved was about to be reborn as something much, much darker. And you can actually trace this change through the critics of the early 20th century. So in the early 1900s, this new wave of literary heavyweights started looking at Dickens differently. First, you had George Bernard Shaw, who called the happy ending an outrage that totally betrayed the book's essential seriousness. Then, George Orwell comes along and reframes Dickens not as an entertainer, but as a generously angry social critic. And the final piece of the puzzle was Edmund Wilson, whose famous essay focused on the psychological gloom, really cementing this brand new way of looking at the novel. The result was a complete 180, a total reversal of the book's reputation. The 19th century view? A light, charming comedy. The 20th century view? A grim, moral fable about guilt, class, and the dark side of ambition. It's almost like they were reading two completely different books.
These modern critics, they had a new term for what Dickens was up to, bildungsroman. It's just a fancy word for a coming-of-age story that's all about psychological and moral growth. For them, Pip's journey wasn't just about a kid getting rich. It was this deep internal struggle with his own conscience. It was an exploration of one character's mind.
And this quote from Edmund Wilson just nails that new perspective. He argued that the novel's real genius was in showing us a whole psychological cycle. Pip starts out as a sympathetic kid, then he becomes a terrible snob, and then he has to find his way back. The power of the story wasn't in the jokes. It was in this really deep, complex psychological portrait.
So, this leaves us with two very different books, doesn't it? The happy comedy and the grim fable. So, which one is it, and why are we still so fascinated by this novel today?
Well, the real answer seems to be that its greatness comes from its ability to be both. The reason this novel has survived and thrived is because it contains all of it. It isn't one or the other, it's a fantastic story with unforgettable characters, and it's a profound critique of social injustice. That's its real genius.
I mean, just think about the themes it gets into. Social class, ambition, guilt, redemption. These are universal human experiences, right? The novel digs into the core of what it means to want a better life and what you might have to give up to get it. That's why it still hits home. At its very heart, this book is making a powerful moral argument that feels just as relevant now as it did then. It's a critique of a world that values money and status way more than simple kindness and integrity. It forces all of us to ask what it really means to be a gentleman or just a good person. And look, this isn't just some book for academics and critics. In 2003, the BBC did this massive poll called The Big Read, and the British public voted Great Expectations the 17th best-loved novel of all time. It's just as popular as it ever was.
The critic Richard Dutton probably has the best definition of a classic I've ever heard. He says, a great work isn't one with some single fixed meaning. No, it's one that every single generation can come to and find something new, something that speaks directly to them. And Great Expectations has definitely proven that, over and over again.
Which brings us right back to our big final question. The whole story of this novel's reputation is a powerful reminder that meaning is never set in stone. So who really gets to decide what a story means? Is it the author, who literally changed his mind? Is it the critics, who totally reinvented it? Or maybe is it you, the reader, who really brings it to life every time you open the cover?